Hey everybody, so we're back live for our next session of the day. Before we get into it, a little bit of housekeeping. I'm just going to repeat some of the stuff I said before Amit's session, the previous session, because many of you, weren't online by then. So, firstly, we have some excellent mentors in the hackathon. We have Dharmesh Ba, who's the head of design and research at D91 Labs and Setu, Anand Datta, who's a venture capitalist at Nexus Venture Partners, and Ramanathan RV, who's a former co-founder and CTO of JustPay. So these guys know a lot about their fields, and they are open to helping you out and mentoring you. So please do reach out to them. Ram, especially, no one's reached out to him yet, so make sure you do that. His details are in the hack Bible. Secondly, we released the criteria for judging the projects. So very quickly, the criteria for judging the projects are originality. How original is your project? Are there some new ideas? Completeness. Did you complete the things you set out to do? Are some features actually working or not? Business viability. Does it have legs in the real world? Technical innovation. Like, are you able to provide something new and an elegant solution? It doesn't mean you have to cram blockchain, AI, and like quantum computing into a project. It just means does it have an elegant technical design and contribution, uh, and the last being X factor. And I also said that if you're working on a project and you realize that the current APIs and specifications don't suit your needs, feel free to mock up a new API, feel free to mock up a new data type or a new schema. If you think it's something which will contribute to the system, then we can actually form a working group and work on including it in the formal specifications. So we want you guys to be creative and to come up with new things, but we also want you to work within the current architecture as far as possible. But if you think that something new could really help, go ahead and mock it up, include it. Don't worry about that. Lastly, we'll be organizing an office hours session on Tuesday, where we'll have a bunch of different mentors where you can come engage with them, get feedback on your idea, your presentation, your tech, all that stuff. So stay tuned for that. And now we'll dive straight into this session. So really excited. We've had lots of questions so far about the legal side of things. That's understandable given this is a new, legal environment and paradigm. So this is the perfect session to get into to answer those questions. I'm very excited today to welcome Mathew and Ankita of Spice Root Legal. Spice Root Legal is a strong ally of this ecosystem. They've been involved from the very start, and they advise clients on how to become an account aggregator, an FIU, and several other things. So they're really experts in this field, and we're very lucky to have them. So could we please have a round of applause for Mathew and Ankita? Thank you very much for being here, Mathew. Ankita, over to you guys.
Okay, great. Thanks, Hariramani. I can see a lot of virtual applause. Is that how our AirMeet works? Anyway, so quickly to introduce myself, I am a tech, media, telecoms, data lawyer. Um, I've been doing this for a good 17, 18 years in various countries, in India for the last 4 years, and had the opportunity of meeting Mahesh just as he was about to set up Samati. So we've been lucky enough to be involved from the first. We don't really see ourselves just as lawyers, but as kind of um, integral parts of the ecosystem. But that said, this is one of many things that I do. I'd like to introduce my colleague Ankita, who does primarily only fintech work. And given her kind of specialist focus and expertise, I'd leave it to Ankita to introduce herself, introduce the legal framework around AAs, and talk a little bit about some of the exciting things that have gone on. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. We like being interrupted, so please jump in and interrupt us. This is not designed as a monologue. A dialogue would be far more fun, so please jump in the moment you have something to say or a question to ask or anything of that sort. Secondly, we've broken up the legal sessions into three. The last session deals with the data ecosystem, including the new law that's coming out. The middle session deals with the regulatory application process. How do you become an A? How do you become an FIU? How difficult it is. We've got a guest along with us who's a client of ours. And then, of course, this session is therefore just meant to sensitize you to the legal roles that the different entities play. We presume that you're well aware and well into the actual technical role and the commercial business role that you play. But we'll spend a little bit of time introducing the legal role. That being said, I will leave that bit to Ankita. Ankita, do you want to take it off?
Yeah. So, hello everyone. Like Mathew said, I am a tech lawyer who's been focusing extensively on fintech. Over the last 1 year, I've been working very closely with Semati, of course, and the multiple account aggregators and FIUs who want to be a part of this ecosystem. Without talking too much about myself, I thought it'll be good to kind of give you a quick overview of what the framework is. How do the different participants interact with each other in this ecosystem, and the kind of commercial aspects of the framework in line with the legal regulations. So I
Ankita,
have
before we do that,
yes.
shall we have? I wasn't fortunate to attend the session before this. I attended bits of it. Can we have a quick round of maybe introductions, or maybe a quick sense of, and perhaps Hariman, you can give this to us, a quick sense of who's in the audience. Are they all primarily techies looking at the AA infrastructure? Are there some existing players? Who's in the mix?
Sure. So I can kind of see that there's a bunch of participants from our hackathon. So there's sort of engineers and product people working with their own projects and ideas for the hackathon. There are a few entrepreneurs who have their own businesses. There's people working at various different companies in the fintech ecosystem, and I see a couple of investors here as well. Um, so yeah, I think we span
Yeah,
all those
and I think Ankita and Lakshmi from Swiggy are the only two women in the mix. I took a quick look at the attendee list.
Yeah, I think we are, it's a very male-dominated landscape,
In
unfortunately.
Mahesh, we should work to fix that problem.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Ankita, go on now. I'm just joking around.
Okay, cool. Let me quickly share my screen. Yeah, Mathew, can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Okay, perfect. So, yeah. Now, quickly on just the AA ecosystem, essentially aims at enabling sharing of financial information that's absolutely consent-based. That's the ultimate premise of this entire ecosystem. Now, the three important participants in this entire ecosystem are of course, the account aggregators that facilitate this process, the financial information providers who have access to the financial information of users, of customers, and the financial information users, like the RBI guidelines call them, are the people who actually want to access and use this financial information. Now, to begin with, who can be these entities and how to be these entities, we'll probably get into those details a little later. But to give you a quick overview, this is essentially how the framework is, where a financial information can request for data, which is your financial information, through an account aggregator. Once an account aggregator gets the consent from a user, it will request this data from the financial information providers and transmit it back to the financial information user. That's the basic premise of how the data flows and the consent works. Account aggregator, of course, is a regulated entity, regulated by the RBI. You have to be an NBFC, you have to get a license.
Ankita, if I can just jump in here, maybe you should make
Yes.
the screen a PowerPoint show. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
A slideshow, please.
My bad.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so of course, the account aggregator entity is a regulated entity. Quite a few obligations are on an account aggregator from a regulatory perspective. Probably we'll cover this in more detail in our next session tomorrow, which talks about the application process and the regulatory framework for an AA. But just to give you an overview of how the AA operates and what it is supposed to do and it's ought to do under these regulations, this is just a quick summary of the roles and responsibilities of an AA. Now, first and foremost, being that an account aggregator can't undertake any other business other than account aggregation. The idea being that it needs to be, it can't have any other related businesses. The business is solely retrieving, collecting, and sharing financial information. And of course, it's absolutely data blind. Right. One important aspect that the RBI has kind of focused on through the RBI regulations is that you can't outsource your aggregation services to a third party. Right. So, for example, if you were to apply for a license and your infrastructure is being outsourced to a third party, the RBI, in a sense, would practically reject it. And we've seen this happen a couple of times. So, the entire infrastructure for an AA has to be owned and operated by it. Right. Now, the entire customer facing aspect of an AA is only to display and show customer financial information. Right. The most important premise of this entire framework is that the data cannot be stored by an AA at any point of time. It's only a pass-through mechanism where once it receives consent from a customer, it can go fetch the data from a financial information provider and share it with the user. Right? All that it has to do with respect to a customer is probably show the customer the kind of consents that have been given and give the customer the ability to revoke a consent. So that's very important from an AA perspective about the handling of data. Right? While it works with the different financial information providers, it can only fetch the financial information that is being specifically sought. Right? At no point can it access any other information or any credentials or any passwords, login IDs, all of that. It's only the specific set of financial information that an FIU has requested for. What also needs to be... Hello?
We can hear you, Ankita.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I thought I had some lag there. Right. The other aspect that we need to be slightly more focused on with respect to sharing of financial information is where and how and with whom this information has been shared. Now, in a few later slides, I will talk about the consent artifact in a little more detail. But consent artifact, just to introduce the concept to all of you here, is basically the consent that a customer gives with respect to sharing of data. There are a few essentials to what this artifact should contain and how it should be handled. Moving on to the responsibilities of an FIP, the financial information provider here. While the regulations right now by the RBI impose certain obligations with respect to verifying the validity of a consent that's been received and verifying the credentials of an AA, how this shall be done is yet to be clarified, right? I suspect the RBI may, provide clarifications on these aspects as and when the ecosystem grows, right? But an FIP, once it receives a consent from the AA with respect to fetching of a financial information, has to essentially validate it, evaluate the specified dates, check the credentials of the aggregator, and then digitally sign this consent, digitally sign the information that is being shared and pass it on to the AA. Right? Of course, it needs to have the entire integrations and adopt the technical specifications by the RBI, have a seamless integration with the AAs to be able to function this. There is no, each AA can partner with as many financial information providers it wants to be able to fetch financial information from as many providers as possible. With respect to financial information users, the regulations do not delve into too much detail, but one very important factor with respect to financial information user is that whatever information is being collected and requested for can be used only in terms of the consent artifact, right? So a lot of companies, and I think this is especially with startups that have a group entity where one entity could be a regulated entity, which could be an FIU, whereas the entire tech and the AI and the ML and the analytics is being done by an affiliate. In which case, the most common question is, if one entity is regulated, whereas the analytics part and the tech part is being done by another affiliate, can I still get access to financial information? Right. Now, the answer to that question would be based on how the consent artifact has been structured. As long as the customer knows who the data is going to, the customer knows who all are the requesting entity, who all would the financial information user be sharing this information with, and has consented to it, it shall be allowed. Okay, now quickly on the consent artifact, right? These are the important aspects of a consent artifact. When a financial information user is going to request for financial information, it needs to clearly lay down a few parameters, right? So first and foremost being the identity of the customer and the contact information, right? Then the nature of financial information that is being requested. So are you going to be requesting for, your account statements for the last 6 months? Is it a one-time request or is it a recurring request, which also the framework allows? As a customer, I could give consent to, say, a bank where I have applied for a loan to be able to fetch my account balance during the term of the loan for the next 12 months at the end of every month, right? Which means if I have a bank account with, like, say, for example, HDFC Bank, and I have procured a loan from Axis Bank, I'm basically consenting that every month at the end, Axis Bank be given details of my account balance with HDFC. Now, the best part about this entire framework is that information that comes from the different providers is very standardized and it's very structured, which makes it very easy to be used by the different users and have protocols and efficient ways of analyzing and conducting their processes with respect to why the information was being collected, be it for a loan application or a credit card application. Right? Now, then I go on to the purpose of collection. Like I said, there are different reasons why a financial information user would be requesting for this information. The purpose needs to be very clearly set out in the consent artifact. Just like going back to my previous example, right? Is it a loan? Is it for a loan? Is it for the next 6 months? How long will they require this consent? Those parameters need to be very clearly laid out, so a customer needs to know what they're consenting for. Then I move on to the identity of recipients. Like I said, as long as a financial information user discloses, right, and the consent artifacts gives a customer a detailed overview of who is going to receive the information, right, and whether it's just, say, Axis Bank or Axis Bank mutual fund house or any other related entity, that needs to be clarified and captured in the consent artifact. If that is not done, then the recipient is only the entity that's seeking the information, in which case sharing the information would fall foul of the law, right? So who all entities are going to actually access this should be through the consent artifact and should have been agreed upon by a customer. Then, of course, the consent creation, the date I give my consent, right? The expiry date. The consent is only for 6 months, is for 1 year, is only a one-time consent that needs to be clearly spelled out in the artifact. It needs to be signed by the AA before it's passed on to the provider to be able to fetch it, right? It also needs to inform the customer every time a consent artifact is used to access the information. So, for example, if I'm giving a consent that's valid for 12 months, right? And every month my financial information is being accessed for a particular purpose with respect to a user, I need to be informed as a customer that, end of this month, this information was fetched and I have already given consent for it. So the consent artifact has been very clearly and very explicitly explained in the regulations and lays down some of the most important parameters that govern this framework and the flow of information with respect to a customer. These are the essential aspects that the RBI, of course, focuses on right now. There could be more aspects that may be detailed as the system grows in the future. Now, rights of a customer, right? The two most important aspects with respect to a customer is that the A that I'm working with gives me the ability to access and see all the consents that I have given with respect to the different financial information users that are accessing and that are requesting this information. Now, one aspect that's not been addressed yet, and again, this is something that we will probably figure once the ecosystem grows and there's more clarity and clarity on the interactions between the AAs, FIPs, and FIUs, is that how would a customer, probably who's partnered and who's signed up on one AA, be able to transfer the consents to another AA, right? So if, say, as a customer, I currently sign up on FinView, right? And I would want to migrate to another AA and have an account with another AA. Does my consent system and my rights to revoke under that I have given with respect to one AA get also transferred to the other AA, right? Or will I have to actually maintain two accounts and simultaneously keep track of consents I have given through different AAs, right? Now, that's a question I think most AAs and FIUs are still struggling with, but it's something that probably will evolve with time. So a customer needs to be clearly given a record of all the consents and, of course, the right to revoke it. Right? At any point of time, a customer should be able to revoke the consent that was provided. Now, again, there is a lot of debate and a lot of, I think the FIUs are kind of struggling with how to deal with this right to revoke by a customer. Because to give you the most easy example, and going back to my lending example here, right? If I have applied for a loan and I have given consent for them to fetch, say, my account statement for the last 6 months in order to verify my credibility, and I have been sanctioned the loan, and I have also given a consent for them to get access to my account balance at the end of every month so that they can track whether I would be a delinquent customer or not. Say if I were to revoke that consent, the basic premise for an FIU to have actually sanctioned that loan to me was based on the consent. Now, would it ultimately affect the service that I have procured from the FIU? Is something that we will have to see and how FIUs tackle this situation. In most cases, and our discussions with the FIUs in the industry indicate that there might be some impact on the service that they are rendering. If the consent is revoked in certain cases, they may have to stop the service because then they have no longer the consent to be able to use the financial information. However, if it is a revocation for a particular use case where the action's already been undertaken by the FIU, then a prospective impact will be difficult to gauge and comprehend and address. Right. So this is one concern that I think FIUs are going to struggle with, depending on the different purposes that they're trying to access financial information. Do I see a couple of questions? Okay, so I have
Ankita,
a question.
I think you need to show your face before you go to the questions. And Hariramani, would you, rather than having this chat format, would you get people on video so we can see faces, etc.?
Yeah, surely. So if anybody has a question they'd like to ask, please click the raise hand button.
I think we
and I
should
can
go
bring you
to
on.
Akash from Finarchy.
So Akash, do you want to hit the raise hand button? On the right side on the tab.
I just thought it would be a lot more fun.
Yeah, no, we don't use it.
I agree.
We don't use it enough, so it's a good change. Anybody with a question? Akash doesn't seem to be here, but anybody who has a question or would like to know something, please
Okay.
hit the
Let me read out then Akash's question. Akash's question, Ankita, is whether A's can see the data, right, or whether the A's are data blind.
So Akash, AAs are absolutely data blind. They cannot see or store the data. However, the AAs are allowed to have a client-facing app. So, or rather, a customer-facing app, as I would say, where they could collect information from providers in an encrypted format where it is decrypted on the device, right? So if I am a customer that's probably using an AA account, that has set up an AA account, I will be able to see my account balance or my last month statements on the AA app where I have linked my different bank accounts or say my DMAT account. So I will be able to see it on my app, on my customer facing side. However, the AA will not have access to it at any point of time. So it's all encrypted throughout the process and it's decrypted only on my device. Does that, I hope that addresses your question.
I'm guessing Akash is very shy. Anyone else with any questions? So the last time we did this, we spoke for about 3 minutes and then got bombarded by questions. So please shoot.
So we
So
have one
Vivek
from Vivek. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Go on, please. Let's get him on video.
I don't know if he wants. If you want to be on video, please hit the raise hand button. It would be cool.
Okay, otherwise, yeah, let me go on. Sorry, I just wanted to see his face. Basically, Ankita, he wants to know whether, in case of a discrepancy in the data between the FIP and the FIU, who is going to mediate? Would it be the AA?
So, so Vivek, over here, in case the RBI regulations are very clear on this aspect. Say if I am a customer facing, if I'm using the customer facing app and I'm probably checking my account balance, in case there's a discrepancy in what I have versus what my bank actually states, the data with the bank and the financial information provider would be deemed correct. Now, if there were to be ever a dispute with respect to what the financial information user has asked for versus what has been provided by a financial information provider, that is a fairly tricky position because you can't get the A to mediate because the A would never really know what information was passed on. So, for example, if a financial information user asked for my last 6 months, account statement, and the financial information provider for some reason has provided not the latest last 6 months but a particular set of 6 months that was not in line with what the request was. Now that is something that I think we will probably a structure would come in through the SRO, through SEMITI. These are of course issues that can play an important role in trying to ensure seamless interaction between the different parties. You can't have, I mean, from a AA perspective, an AA wouldn't be able to mediate and intervene into this matter because they have no role here or access to the information that's being shared. Even from a contractual perspective over here, an FIU's arrangement contractually would be with an AA through their service agreement, whereas the arrangement between the AA and the FIP would be with respect to fetching the information. So if there would be a scenario where an FIU has not received the request, the information that's being sought, there will have to be a dispute or a grievance mechanism that will have to be put in place to address this. Very, very valid point. I think we are still figuring how this would work.
So, short answer to Ankita's rather long story. If there is a problem, if there is a mismatch between the data that is with the FIU and the data that is with the FIP, then it is either the FIP's fault or the FIU's fault. It is very, very unlikely going to be an A's fault. Nobody is going to mediate. You would either end up going to court, you could end up going to go to the RBI, or you could end up going to the data protection authority that is going to be formed under the personal data protection bill. I don't think poor Mahesh and Hariramani would be interested in mediating between the many parties. Does that answer your question, Vivek? Okay, perfect. So we have a whole bunch of new questions. If you don't want to come on video, why don't you at least come on audio and ask it out? Because then you can ask follow-up questions. But Tarun from Othbridge has got a fabulous question. I think bang on point. He says, as of now, only RBI, SEBI, IRDA, PFRDA regulated entities can become an FIU. What about fintechs that are not regulated?
So, Tarun, any if any user who would want to access financial information through this entire framework will have to be a financial information user, which means it will have to have been regulated and governed by one of the four sector regulators. Now, most companies that fintechs that we work with would end up taking an investment advisor license or an insurance broker license or some sort of license that kind of helps them be regulated and governed by one of the four regulators. The also the other option that fintechs have, and this is provided they're a part of a group that has one entity that's already regulated, would be through the consent artifact, where one, say, maybe an NBFC who's regulated is the FIU, and in the consent artifact, where the consent is being sought from a customer, they clearly disclose that the information is being collected for so and so purpose and will be shared with this in order to provide this with a particular fintech company in order to provide the service. So these are the only two ways where fintechs could be able to access financial information user in within the legal framework that's currently in place.
Yeah, great point. Currently, implying that in the future it may change, and we may have different kinds of people. Sorry to cut you off, Matthew, but I was just going to say that we had somebody who had requested the mic, so I was going to
Perfect.
hand it over to that brave person. No, it's Mahesh. So Mahesh is okay. Okay, Mahesh. Sure, like we can get you on there.
Okay, at least I have the camera on because I think, yeah, so I think many have asked, like because in AA we are able to revoke the consent, right? So many have asked, okay, so what happens to my information which is with the FIU? Okay, will they automatically have it removed? Will they forget my data? Or will they be able to continue to retain my data after I have revoked? I understand that in future they will not be able to have access to the new data, but what happens to the old data which is with them?
Ankita, do you want to take this or should I?
Maybe you should take this and probably give them an overview
Okay.
of the PDF as well.
So
Yeah.
okay.
So data is an obsession, and this reflects on two things. One is what the AA architecture says, and I don't think, Mahesh, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think right now the AA architecture says anything very clearly about how long you can retain data.
Yeah.
Yes.
Agreed.
So the broad rule of thumb for data law generally is that data can only be retained for as long as it is necessary for the purpose for which consent was given.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And therefore, if I'm giving you consent for one immediate processing and I require the FIU to delete it, then data can be stored only for that purpose. If, on the other hand, I'm giving you some kind of a consent which allows the FIU to store that data, then the FIU can store the data. Even if the FIU wants to store the data beyond what consent is given, typically FIUs will be allowed to store it as long as they anonymize, pseudonymize, or mask the data. But as long as it is personal data, the FIU will only be able to store it for the purposes for which consent is given. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but see, like if I can share one example, real example. So, like, when you apply, for example, for a home loan, from what I understand, the NBFC or the bank is, obviously they have to follow the rules of their own regulator, where irrespective of whether the loan was approved or not, they need to have that information for some number of years. I think it is 7 years. So even if you revoke the consent, from what I understand, they will be able to hold your information, but as you said, they are not allowed to process the data.
So I think we will have a little bit of a fight between the RBI and the as of yet formed, not yet formed Data Protection Authority Because yes, I agree with you. In the normal course of things, the RBI requires you to store it for 7 years. This clashes with the DPA's mandate, which is that one, which is that it should be only stored for as long as it is necessary. And I'm not particularly sure why the RBI thinks 7 years is necessary. Secondly, it will compete with a court driven mandate, which says that if I ask you to delete my data, you have to delete my data. So there are three points of intersection to that question, and how the law will play there, not yet clear. I imagine there will be a judgment on that in the next 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
but
Thank you.
it's going to be definitely a fight. It's been a long fight um, in the EU on the same question. In fact, the European Union EDPB, which is the guiding authority, about 4 days ago came out with a very detailed notification on how a right to delete and a right to erasure would work. Complicated questions, but to be careful, what I would suggest is if you're within the AA ecosystem, you should keep the data for 7 years. And in your consent, in where you obtain your consent, you should inform the consumer that this will be retained for 7 years.
Okay.
So Nikhil has raised his hand. Shall I
Nikhil
bring him on?
always has Nikhil always has questions.
Okay.
Yeah, hi guys.
Hey, Nikhil.
Hi, Nikhil.
So, my question is that, like, consider the regulated entity is a NBFC or a registered investment advisor. So they have their own set of, compliance rules from SEBI and RBI. So apart from that, are there any new specific, auditing and compliance rules that are coming into place with respect to the account aggregator ecosystem?
So, Nikhil, the account aggregator as an entity, the entity is regulated by the RBI. Now, the current regulations, the RBI only has the right to be able to audit the AA. The framework as of now in place does not give AA the ability to audit or verify the actions and inactions by a financial information user. As of now, you will probably still be governed by the specific legislation and the regulation and the sector regulator from where you've got your license. So, if it's an investment advisor, it would be the SEBI. If it's an insurance related license that you have, then it would be the IRDA. But as of now, the AA doesn't have the power to look into your functioning. The RBI doesn't give AA the authority yet.
And as the RBI shouldn't, right? The AA is just a pipe. They have no. They're not a regulator of any sort.
Right.
Mahesh,
So,
Mahesh, Aryaman, and the team at Sahamati might evolve into some kind of an SRO and might come up with some guidelines.
yeah, I mean, my question was around if something like SEBI, have they come out with rules that are specific to RIAs who are acting as FIUs, or
No,
NBFCs
no
who are
one,
acting as.
no
Okay,
one has come
Nothing
out with
yet.
specific rules.
okay, great.
Yeah, but I suspect that that's a good time because um, it might be a time for the industry to set your own rules by yourself, right? As opposed to relying on third-party regulators whose awareness of the ecosystem might not be as sharp as yours. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah,
sure,
sure.
that clears
Thanks.
it up.
Preet, you had raised your hand earlier with a question. Do you wanna ask it again? If you raise, I can even invite people on stage. I am told. So I'm not sure if. Yes, there we go.
All right, so my question is more technical oriented, so like it's not very legal. So my question is, let's say Money One is a provider. So what Money One is doing, it's acting, it makes the it makes the life of whoever wants to use the account aggregator framework easy because it takes the encryption decryption away from you. Now, in that case, what legalities does MoneyOne as an entity have, and what do I as the user have? Like, so how does that work out? Because it's like an aggregator for the aggregator. because it's abstracting away the encryption decryption part. It's storing some data, and then what laws apply on me as storing the data, and what laws apply on money one as storing the data.
Please, could you repeat
And
that in parts of your speech? I mean, parts of when you were speaking, I could not hear you.
okay, I'm extremely sorry. So what I'm talking about is middleware providers. So like services that would make it easier to maybe get insights on data, or would make it easier to fetch the data. Was that clear?
Ankita, could you hear
So
Preet? I couldn't.
Yeah, Ariman, have you been able to hear the question? I
yeah,
can't hear it clearly.
yeah. So One Money has this solution. Some of the A's, they have these solutions where basically they provide an FIU module. So that means that the hackers are able to basically access data through this FIU module, which
Okay.
actually is a piece of software that acts as an FIU and requests data. So the FIU shows up as, whatever, what Money One or FinPro or something like that, and
Okay.
it receives data. It uses its own sort of keys to decrypt the data, and then it passes that decrypted data to the app developer who wishes to put it into like a PFM app or something like that. So I think the question was that what is the legal standing of that middleware provider, because they are using their own FIU ID to actually request and decrypt the data. So, but then they're passing it on to like a third part, like the actual user who is like a PFM app or something. I believe that is the question.
So I'll refrain from going into specifics because One Money is now a client. But generally, the entire mandate of a AA who's also got an FIU, in-prem kind of integration application, would be entirely contractual, right? It would depend on the consent that the user is giving. It would depend on the consent that the FIU has sought, and it would depend entirely on your arrangement with Money. To some extent, I am aware that Sahamati is going to come up with model contracts which regulate the entire process, right? But from a data angle, of course, One Money is not accessing your data. One Money is just providing end result that the customer is asking for. But however, in respect of the entire relationship and data flow, you'd have to look to the contractual mechanism, the click wrap that you sign. Does that answer your question, Preet?
Yeah, that does answer my question. But in such a scenario, who is the FIU? Does One Money become the FIU, or am I the FIU? Because then, when you talk about revoking consent, are you revoking it from Money One in this case? Are you revoking it from me? So, like, when in the future you talk about actually deleting the data, uh,
It
do- does that apply on me? So like I'm just talking about like hypothetical stuff. Like
yeah.
how would that flow work? Because then there would not just be one middleware. There would be 10 middlewares that a service might use to do different things. So like something could be for database, something could be for insight, something could be for making some sense in some other sense. Like I
Right. So
hope.
to a large extent, I would imagine that you would be the FIU. However, it depends, and One Money would be something like a technical service provider. However, it would depend entirely on how the roles are defined contractually between the many parties and what someone like a One Money does in this entire transaction, and of course, what you do in this transaction as well, right? So
Yeah, that's
assuming that you are the customer facing end of this and that you are triggering the consent requirement, then you would be the FIU.
So I believe another team was also working on a problem which raised the same question, and they pointed to the consent artifact, which currently has room for one FIU ID, and they were saying, is it possible for us to include another FIU ID or potentially introduce a new field called like middleware ID, so that the customer becomes aware of who are the TSPs or related parties that might get access to the data, and those entities are captured in the consent artifact, and everything is kind of clearly spelled out. So as I was saying in the housekeeping before this session, if you have such recommendations for ways that the actual spec might evolve, then please do, for the hackathon, go ahead and do it, if it's an idea that has legs that can actually work and improve the ecosystem, we'd be happy to discuss it and work on actually including it formally. So for the hackathon, ask all these questions. 100%, these are great questions. Ask the questions, and where you think you have an idea or a suggestion, please do put that into your project.
Right, that
Perfect.
makes a ton of sense. Thank you, guys. I'll leave
Sure.
it here.
Awesome.
Okay, we've got a question on can a tech company partner with AI and offer an independent app where it facilitates a marketplace equivalent environment for both small FIUs and customers? Here, the FIU data can be stored through integrated. Okay, so this requires a very. So the question is whether a tech company can offer a marketplace where FIUs can interact with customers. This is beyond the AA ecosystem, but my quick answer would be yes. Must be structured very carefully with respect to risk. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Should be structured very carefully with respect to risk, however possible. Three.
Okay, I think Tarun
Tarun, Ankita.
had a
Yeah,
Tarun
go
had
on,
a
Ankita.
follow-up question. So Tarun, like I think Ariman just said, there are players, and your consent artifact, of course, needs to be very clearly spelled out, indicating that information would probably be shared with this affiliate or the group company, presuming that one affiliate of the group entity is the regulated entity and one is probably the tech company. In which case, if the consent is given, you should be able to share it with the fintech affiliate of your group as well. Now, I think a second question is, can NBFC transfer to fintech through the API? If you are referring to the entire API integration with the AA, it can't. The information will have to be first received by the financial information user and then independently shared with the fintech. The fintech wouldn't be able to integrate into the AA ecosystem without being a regulated entity. Does that help?
I think he meant like a fintech partner could be like an underwriting provider, right? Like the NBFC is the FIU. Looks like Ankita might be having some network issues. But I think like a use case or an example in which Bajaj is the FIU and they wish to give a loan, but for underwriting they need to share the data with let's say like a underwriting provider. So can Bajaj request it as the FIU, but then give the data to the underwriting provider who is not regulated?
Consent is the bottom requirement. So as long as there is consent obtained adequately, clearly, there shouldn't be a problem. And
And
as
that's
long
where
as
we can.
sorry.
No, so I was just gonna say that's where we can, like potentially what we were just discussing changes to the consent artifact, because it could come in there potentially, right? Like beyond just having a
Yeah.
terms and conditions type of consent, it could potentially even be captured directly in the consent artifact.
Absolutely. I think that would be
Absolutely, the
that
consent
would be important
artifact
for it
should
to be
be.
recorded.
Go on, Ankita.
Sorry. There's a lag, I think, Matthew. Go ahead.
No, go on, please. I interrupted you.
No. So like Arvind, like you said, I think this should be a part of the consent artifact so that it's clear to the customer who are the parties that will be accessing their financial information, even through the FIU and
Yeah,
every entity that it's being shared with.
yeah. So Team Finakin, looking at you guys, amongst others, but looking forward to some, solutions on this from you. Any other questions, guys? People would like to ask something? And I think there's a lot of stuff. Like there's stuff in the chat section, there's stuff in the question section, there's chat in the question section. Uh, could we, could we just keep questions in the question section, and then if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and you can do it just using audio, no video required. Uh, might be better that way. Okay, great. Warren, there you go.
Hello.
Hello.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Hi, Warren.
All right, perfect. So, hi. So, I think that was a fantastic session. I just have one specific question. Again, I think the consent artifact at this point is a little constrained. And with regards to that,
Can you
a
hear
question that I've
things?
also seen from other people.
I can hear nothing.
We can. I could hear. I don't know, Ankita, could you hear?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes, Warren, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. So this is also a question I had seen in different sessions previously. So it's on the theme of actually the one specific field, the purpose field within the consent artifact, and that requires you to have this purpose code's already outlined in the specification. However,
Yeah.
one of the questions I had was some of those seem to overlap in purpose. So there is, wealth manager, and then there's personal finance manager, and there's a couple of others like that. Is that related to the license that you get? So if our team registers then as a either an investment advisory or depending on what we register as, does that define the purpose we use, or are these just unrelated and we can pick pretty much whatever? How does that work?
So I think Mahesh might be the best person to answer this, but quickly, just from a regulated entity perspective, if you are an investment advisor under the SEBI, you probably don't have the license to advise or collect information with respect to lending, right? Or say if you are an NBFC that's separately trying to provide investment advisory services, you will need an investment advisor license. So I suspect the at least presently how these codes have been put down in the specifications is from the purpose of the end. I mean, from the business perspective of the entity that's trying to fetch this data. So if you are an investment advisor, it's going to be with respect to the investment advisory services that you're carrying out. Some of these licenses, and not all, restrict you from undertaking different businesses. And also, if you do undertake different businesses, then it needs to be specifically categorized. You need to have a separate team. You need to have different ways to structure the entity and the part of business that's regulated from the unregulated aspects. So I suspect this is where the concern from an RBI perspective is stemming from, to try and ensure that the FIU that's regulated by a particular entity is using it for that specific business.
Okay. But as of right now, it doesn't seem to be locked down as such. Every time I make a consent request, I can put in pretty much whatever consent code each time.
Okay.
And so I was just wondering with regards to that, either during the certification process from Mathew or somewhere else, is that something that will be given to
So for
FIUs
some
in a
reason, I
one-way?
can't hear
Yeah.
Warren. Hariramani, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Could you try
But I
maybe
can't.
refreshing once, Mathew?
Yeah, let me try that.
Yeah, sorry, Warren. Just hang tight for a second.
Sure, no issue.
Hey, so Mathew, are you back? Can you hear?
I'm back. I can hear everyone other
Hello?
than Warren.
You still can't hear Warren.
I can't hear Warren. My computer does not like Warren. What can I say?
I guess. That's probably it. I guess,
But
Hariramani,
anyway,
you
as
can
long as
probably
Ankita can
repeat
hear
then.
Warren, I'm guessing we're okay.
Sorry, I think I got dropped off. I'm just going to go off video because I think my internet's a little patchy. But Arvind, could you just repeat the last bit?
Yeah.
Maybe I can ask my question. Aryaman, you can repeat, and then
Yes.
one of
Yeah.
them could.
So I'll just
Sure.
Warren is going to ask a question, then I'm going to repeat it to you guys, Mathew.
Okay, so the summary here is that I'm not entirely sure as an FIU which purpose code to use each time I make a request. Is that something that will be given to me during the during the ceremony, whatever process that we have before we can actually go live, sort of audit or whatever it's going to be, or will it depend on the license that we need to register with?
So Matthew and Ankita, Warren's question is that he's not sure which purpose code the FIU will need to use. Is it something which is given to that FIU according to the Sehmati certification, or does it depend on the license which that FIU holds?
Purpose code for what purposes? Ankita, this is your field.
Yeah, so
the consent request.
Warren, I would still suspect that it would be for the license that you hold.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there
Yeah, I
like a
can't hear
chart
anyone.
somewhere maybe that maps these out?
Sorry.
This is a great question. Have you seen on api.revit.org.in there's some basic information about the purpose codes? I mean, it's not very detailed, but it has information about, few different. You've seen that table, right? The one with the category name, personal finance, and the
Correct.
description. Okay. So
Well,
beyond
most
that,
realistic products, yeah, will actually span sometimes multiple categories, and so then the
yeah,
question becomes: is it really spelled out, or is it sort of loosely defined, and we can go whichever way we feel like?
good question. Maybe Mahesh can even jump in on this, but I'm not aware of any, more detailed table than what's on the link that Gopal just shared in the chat.
Yeah, it is what is there in the specifications right now. Maybe there could be more clarity on this once there are probably more FAQs or clarifications issued by the RBI.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Sweet. Any other questions? We seem to have a lot in the question section. So we had 1 minute ago from Anshul, who's in Warren's team, it seems. Does the TSP need to be in some way exclusive? Does the TSP need to be exclusive to the FIU? And what regulations apply to the TSP in terms of data usage processing?
Mathew, do you want to take that? Hello? Hello, Mathew, are you there?
He's on mute right now.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, Mathew, we can hear
Hello,
you.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm guessing not.
Okay.
Hello?
Yes, Mathew, we can hear you.
Okay, we might need to have him do another refresh.
Okay, let me just quickly address that, Anshul. As of now, I don't think TSPs have to be exclusive to a particular FIU. With respect to data usage and processing by a TSP, currently it's of course the IT standards and the SPDI rules that become applicable from a data storing and processing perspective. And also a lot will govern on the... Hello?
Hello?
Yes, Mathew, can you hear us?
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay, looks like we're having some issues there. Maybe Ankita, you can take over for now.
Yeah, Ashwin, going back to the data usage and processing, of course, it will be all subject to A, what's there in the consent artifact, B, what's applicable with respect to the data laws currently in force. But again, like Mathew said, a lot will change with the current pending PDP bill, where everything with respect to data is subject to purpose limitation, which means if your processing aspect from a technology service provider perspective is completed and you don't require the data, you're not required to store it. So it'll evolve based on the PDPB and how their interaction with the FIU is.
Perfect. I can now finally hear you.
Okay. So Mathew, maybe if you just would want to add upon this. Anshul had a question on what regulations would apply to the technology service providers with respect to data usage and processing.
Okay, so that again, there are two angles to that. One is a regulatory angle. It will be the general data protection law of the country, which at this stage is the reasonable security procedures rules under the Information Technology Act, which will soon become the Personal Data Protection Bill Act whenever it is fully in force. In addition to that, presumably there will be RBI guidelines which may apply to a TSP. And in addition to that, the contractual framework between the parties would apply. Is there any specific thing in respect of the TSP that you are worried about? Ankita, Hariramani, I hope no one is saying anything.
Yeah, Mathew, we can hear you. Let's just see if there's a follow-up question. Okay, I think that addresses his concern.
And presumably we will see an RBI Data Protection Authority conflict at some stage. But it will evolve. Hariramani, shall we pick the next question up?
Yes.
Yeah. So Raghu, who's a retired banker, wants to know whether the ombudsman will step in for a dispute. I presume not. I don't think the ombudsman's mandate extends to the account aggregator ecosystem. I also hope not, because the ombudsman takes a lot of time and isn't the most effective. As someone who tries to resolve disputes in this space, isn't the most effective way of resolving a dispute at this point. I hope that answers the question. Of course, Mahesh sees roles for an ombudsman both for FIPs, FIUs, and AAs. Perhaps an account aggregator ecosystem specific ombudsman, or maybe an SRO. No, Mahesh?
I would assume he says yes. I'm assuming that thumbs
I
up.
saw a lone thumbs up going. I'm guessing that would be Mahesh.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you want to pick any other question?
I think there's one that's come from Jigar on Personal Finance Management app. Jigar, like I think I mentioned earlier, you have to be accessing information either through a regulated entity or become a regulated entity yourself.
Yeah, guys, in the future, please don't put answers to the questions on chat. It kind of makes it a little confusing. I mean, in questions, we can put it in chat. Um, Sweet. So, anybody would like to ask a question, raising hand and doing so.
I think there is a hang on. There is a question from but Mahesh has already answered it. I think there is and I think Anshul wants to know whether a TSP needs to be exclusive to an FIU. Absolutely not, I would imagine.
Krishna asks, with the kind of consumer data being used by different services based on AA and the consent to be provided by the individual consumer for many potential transactions that he may be interested, will a consumer be forced to provide consent?
That's not a legal question.
Yeah.
Is there some kind of um, is there an ability to walk away for a consumer if he still wants to use specific products? Probably not.
Yeah, and the same thing kind of happens today, right? Like, if you want a loan, and the loan officer asks you for your personal data, and you imagine you have to give it to him in the form of a passbook or PDFs or something like that. He's not going to give you the loan if you say no. So while he's not forcing you to give him that data, he's not giving you the loan without getting the right inputs for his underwriting. So in that sense, you might have to give consent. And some services may offer account aggregation services on top of things like screen scraping and SMS parsing, but others may say, listen, it's just consent or nothing on the AA platform. So Abhav asks, can the middleware provider TSP store data that they have attained in flight? So Abhav, I'm assuming do you mean metadata associated with the consent, or do you mean data after it's been decrypted? Abhav, you want to raise your hand maybe and just ask the question?
Anyway, I'm
Sorry, go ahead, Mathew.
no, I'm just guessing. And Ariman and Mahesh, please come in if you're right, if you have a perspective here. But I'm just guessing that decrypted data can't be stored by the TSP. Do you have a perspective on that?
It doesn't seem like it should be able to. It seems like if the TSP has something which they're doing for the FIU, for example, analyzing it or something, that they can maybe store the results of the analysis. I'm not even sure about that, to be honest.
Correct. So as long as it's not part of the personal data of the customer who's given you the consent, I'm guessing some element of access to the TSP would not be harmful. However, as long as it is personal data and it's been given only for the purposes of an FIU, then the TSP should not be able to call that.
Yep. Okay, here's Abhav. I think he can probably let us know if we answered his question. Abhav, are you there? You just withdraw the mic as I was handing you the mic. That's very shifty. But I think he mentioned that in the chat that he was indeed referring to decrypted data. Okay, he's back.
Hi, sorry, I think I had problems with my browser accessing my microphone. So my question is around if I'm a middleware service provider and I'm doing something like credit scoring, which is going to be used by multiple FIUs. And if I want to aggregate that and be able to run analytics, run my models offline, then I should have a way to store this data somewhere where I can run these models.
So, Abhav, you'll have to, I mean, this is just a quick answer. You'll have to dig deep into your model. But I would imagine that you'll have to be an FIU and you would have to be regulated and thereafter provide the service to others.
Okay.
Right. So you would not. I don't think legally you would be able to provide. You would be able to store data that was obtained for one purpose, create a credit score on top of that, and then share the score with multiple other people. That's one. Secondly, you may also want to look at the credit rating laws of the country to figure out whether you require, apart from the account aggregator ecosystem, whether your model requires you to be registered as a credit scoring agency, and therefore whether you have to restructure your model to get out of that requirement.
Okay, but what if I approach it from, say, an unsecured lending provider and they have access to this person's bank account information for the purpose of giving that loan, right? And as in order to facilitate them being able to score this person, analyze this person for that loan, I'm accessing that data which is obtained with the customer's consent, but I'm just acting as the technical service provider for this credit score for this credit providing company by giving them insights on that data. In that
Right.
case,
So, like I
does
said,
it have to register as an FIU and or the credit scoring agency?
so if your role as a TSP is primarily to provide services to an FIU, to a
Yes.
particular FIU who has taken consent for that process, right? So, in a particular one-to-one equation where you're analyzing data, you have got consent from the customer for that particular purpose. Now, you can't use that consent to fuel either your own data scoring, kind of bank, nor can you share that data with another FI, right? Because that's not how the system works. The question of whether you are caught, so clearly, as long as it's a one-to-one equation with an FIU who's taken consent, you should be fine from an account aggregator, FIU, consent artifact law kind of perspective. The question of whether you are acting as a credit rating agency or not depends on exactly what you are doing in the process of providing your services. If you are providing a rating, then I suspect you would still fall within the realm of the credit rating laws. However, if you are merely providing insights without a direct rating itself, then you may escape the long arm of the credit rating law. I must warn you that the credit rating law in India is extremely wide, broad, etc. And so you must really structure your offering as a TSP to ensure you fall out of it. However, we know that there are quite a few startups who've structured their offering in a manner to fall out of the credit rating laws. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Okay. Thank
It's
you.
possible, but you need to really engage with the law for that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
perfect.
Sweet. So I just cleared everything in the chat in the questions tab. Apologies, there was just too much there, and I couldn't really follow what were questions and what were comments. So I just removed everything. So if anybody does have a question, please put it in the tab or raise your hand. Or if there's anything else, Mathew and Ankita, that you think we haven't covered from your presentation, or just important things to keep in mind, uh, as we go into this legal and regulatory overview.
Right. Yeah. So a couple of things to keep in mind. One, I suspect let's keep the data for the data session. It's complicated. It's technical. And yes, I know there are questions around similarities on the GDPR. We will take all of that during the data session. Similarly, let's keep the regulatory questions. How do I make an application? How do I engage with SEBI? What kind of data can I share around that? For that, um, let's restrict ourselves to questions around, and I think I saw a lot of questions that have suddenly disappeared. But let's restrict ourselves to questions around role of all these parties. The TSP, I'm guessing all the middleware players would want to have questions around that. The FIU, and the questions around what are the model contracts that Sahamati is coming up with that could cover the FIU, the A, and the kind of commercial arrangement between the many parties. So, any questions around those? And I saw one immediately. Oh, that was Hariramani around what data should cover. Sure. Uh, but anyone else, please pop by with the question if we haven't answered it, because I saw a fair number of questions which we haven't answered.
Yeah, no, a lot of those questions were actually just people answering questions.
People's questions.
So, yeah.
Okay, I think I just have one quick thing to add, and I think this comes from most sessions that we've had on this particular framework. Uh, a lot of fintechs want to be a part of this entire ecosystem, and of course, the concern is how to be an FIU and how to get a license. Whatever you do, whether you choose to get a license, there are simpler registrations that you could do with the SEBI or the PFRDA to become a regulated entity. Should you not want to choose to do that and not be regulated and comply with these sector regulators, then you need to be very, very careful of your arrangement with a particular FIU that's going to help you access the information for the service that you're providing to an FIU. And your contractual framework for that needs to be fairly robust, because you wouldn't want a situation where you're being penalized to access financial information by a particular FIU that you were not ought to. So that just needs to be structured and thought out well, either by a license directly or through an FIU if you're partnering with them.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Sweet. So I think in the absence of any further questions,
No, there is one more.
okay.
I think Abhav wants to know whether FIU registrations are all use case specific. I'm not too sure I understand the question. I'm guessing you're asking whether an FIU is restricted by the registration on the role that it can play. It's not. Once you are an FIU, you can play a fairly wide role and it can evolve within the system. Was that the question, Abhav? No, again, just to clarify what we earlier said, no, you don't have to. So the idea behind an FIU registration, and Mahesh can give a little bit more framework here, is that India's general data laws were considered inadequate to address the data questions that come up with the AA architecture. So, what the RBI and the SEBI and PFRDA and all of them came out with is the idea that we will have our own sectoral laws that apply to this, which would, at least before the Personal Data Protection Act comes up, which would kind of make sure that FIUs are forced to treat data with a modicum of respect, which is why the registration process was there. Therefore, you don't have to really figure out which regulator applies to your particular use case. As long as you are regulated by one of the four, you cross threshold and you're okay with that. Does that answer your question, Abhav? And then you can evolve your use case as you want. Perfect. I noticed one more question from Sri, which is basically when the tech company partners with AAs to offer an independent solution, then can the customer be allowed to manage the consents via this app? Okay, let's run this question by again. So, assuming that a TSP is partnering with an A, I thought a TSP would typically partner with a FIU. But regardless, let's assume that a TSP is partnering with an entity in the A ecosystem to offer a marketplace. Then can the customer be allowed to manage the consents via yes, as long as the entire consent architecture conforms to consent being required by the FIU and is being given by the customer at this particular point. The AA regulations and the RBI laws do not restrict you from playing a role which helps the FIU trigger and manage the consent. Does that answer your question? Perfect. Yes, but I can see.
Just to add in there, it needs to, it can't be an extremely material aspect that's being performed by the AA, because then there could be a risk that the RBI may construe as the AA outsourcing it to a third party. So it depends on the exact role that you're playing with the AA and what service you are providing them.
Yeah, but I would imagine the way you would structure this is as a relationship with an FIU, not as a relationship with an AA. Does that make sense, Ankita?
Yeah, that would absolutely work.
You should be able to structure this question.
Yes.
No, but Sri really wants to provide services to an AA itself. If you are providing services to an AA, you would have to comply with the outsourcing guidelines. You're right. You would have to comply with the outsourcing guidelines. You're right. You can't be outsourcing the job of being an AA. So the role would have to be very, very carefully delineated and marked out. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Perfect.
So I think it doesn't look like we have any questions, and maybe we can take a small break before the next session at 5 p.m. But I would like to thank you both, Mathew and Ankita, for this really informative, wonderful session. I think the audience, also appreciates it a lot. Yeah, you can see they're already spamming the emojis. So I think it's been really useful and very interactive. So it's a welcome break from the style which we've been employing so far, which has mostly been more of a monologue. But yeah, really appreciate it and looking forward to a session tomorrow. So as a reminder to all of you, we run the session tomorrow at 3 p.m., which will focus on how one can become an account aggregator, the process of filing an application, and also the process of becoming an FIU. So a lot of your questions can be answered tomorrow. And then next week, we have another session, next weekend rather, which will be more like an open, talking about data and the data privacy bill and, comparisons to GDPR, and also offering another forum like this to have questions answered. So Matthew's also put his contact details in the chat. So please do reach out to him if you have questions, and let's show some appreciation for our speakers again. Thank you so much, Mathew and Ankita.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
As any lawyer would tell you, we love speaking. So thank you for the opportunity.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So everybody else, we'll see you back at 5 p.m. for our masterclass on India Stack and the role of account aggregators by Sanjay Jain. Thanks again, Mathew and Ankita.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.